Welcome to Nostalgia Marcana. I'm your host, Doug Leaf. Each episode of this podcast, we will look back on the pop cultural ephemera that remains in our cultural zeitgeist today and try to understand why we remain enchanted all these years later. This week, we will be revisiting
The Phantom of the Opera is dead inside your mind.
After a record-breaking 35 years on Broadway. This autumn, it was announced that Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera would finally be closing. This is a record that is unequaled in theater circles and may never again be equaled in our lifetime. This is an extraordinary piece of musical theater, and I think it's worth taking a look at, not only because it's, of course, a retelling of a Halloween favorite. The Phantom is a universal monster, both small U and big U, although he did not make it into the Monster Mash, unfortunately. Nevertheless, this is a story and a character that has clearly stood the test of time, and we'll be talking about this particular adaptation of it today because of its power. It's worth noting that the ticket sales in Broadway were starting to flag, especially in the wake of the pandemic, which was why the producers made the decision to finally close the curtain on this one. And the second they announced it, of course, ticket sales went through the roof. Now, this is a nostalgia podcast, so before we get to talking about this musical and the story that spawned it, I, of course, want to talk about why this means so much to me. This is a story that is near and dear to my heart, a personal favorite for many reasons. First and foremost, if you don't know me personally, I'm a guy who spent a lot of time performing, and I was bit, as many performers are, by the theater bug. And the theater bug that bit me was seeing this show. My parents took me to see it at the Amundsen Theater in Los Angeles in 1988 when it was touring with Michael Crawford, who originated the role of the Phantom. And I had seen theater productions up to this point, small things in my hometown, but nothing that approached the scale and musical power, the pyrotechnics, the stage magic, all of the artistic and technical things that made this come together. I'd just never seen anything like it, and I was blown away. I immediately fell in love with it. I listened to the soundtrack a billion times, and I became, fascinated with earlier adaptations of the story. Both I read the original book, I saw several of the different movies that have been made out of this, and we'll be talking about that a little bit. And one of my most treasured memories and possessions involves this tale. By a stroke of incredible luck, my grandmother was living in, or still lives actually, she's 101, God bless her, lives in a retirement community, and a few doors down from her in the early 90s, a vacancy opened up, and it was filled by a lady named Mary Philbin. Now, that name doesn't mean anything unless you know a lot about the Phantom of the Opera, but she played Christine in the original silent film, the famous one starring Lon Chaney. She played opposite him, and she just happened to move a few doors down after I had already been gobsmacked by seeing the Webber musical. So she said, "Hey, would you like to meet her?" And so I got to spend an hour chatting up a silent movie star, and I have her autograph. I got this coffee table book that went along with the musical, and of course it talked about the history of the story, and so I have a picture of her and Lon Chaney signed by her, and I don't know many people that could say they got a silent movie star's autograph, so that's just a very special connection between me and the Phantom. So where to begin? I think the obvious place to start here is with the original novel published in 1909 by Gaston Leroux. When Andrew Lloyd Webber set about making this musical, he watched the Lon Chaney movie, he watched the 1940s remake starring Claude Rains, and he felt like he couldn't crack the story. It just wasn't working until he went back and found an out-of-print copy of the original Leroux novel. And after that, he had the inspiration he needed to create this show. I think that is important because although, as I mentioned, there have been many, many, many versions of the Phantom of the Opera over the years, both serious ones and parody ones, and the Scooby-Doo cartoons that have the Phantom of the Opera in it, and all kinds of places this character has shown up. Really, only the Lon Chaney silent movie and Andrew Lloyd Webber's show, those are the only ones that are true adaptations of the LaRue novel. Every other major adaptation of this story really only takes some key core elements of it and uses those. But as far as following the actual story and telling the beats, you're basically getting a Phantom of an opera, but not the Phantom of the Opera. So going back to LaRue, the original, he's an interesting dude. He had inherited a fortune and then squandered it all gambling. And after that, he took up a career as a writer and a journalist. And while he was working as a journalist, he ended up covering a story at the Opera Garnier, the Paris opera house where the story is set. And during that time, he learned about two interesting things that would ultimately come to be the inspiration for the Phantom. One, there was an instance in the late 1800s when one of the counterweights from the chandelier crashed down into the theater and killed a concierge who it was her first day of work, actually, and that's how she died. Now, the actual chandelier never itself went crashing into the ground, but this gave LaRue the idea of, what if the chandelier did crash, and what if there was someone behind it? The other thing he learned about that was a true life inspiration for the story is the underground lake. The Phantom, of course, famously lives on the other side of a lake deep beneath the Paris Opera House. And there is one, sort of. It's what you would actually call a cistern. When the Opera House was being built, it was close to an underground tributary of the Seine River. And because of that, as they were building it, the weight of the Opera House kept causing water to flood into the bottom of it. And so they said, well, there's nothing we can do. We can keep pumping the water out. It just keeps coming in. It's the Seine River. It's not going anywhere. So what can we do? We can contain it. So Charles Garnier hit on this idea of building this subterranean lake basically to contain this water so it can be managed. It is still there to this day. Parisian firefighters use it for training, for like diving in pitch black situations. I'm not sure exactly why French firefighters would have a need for this, but that is what it is used for. It has never, of course, played host to a real disfigured madman, as far as we know. But those are the two things that Gaston Leroux used to create his story. It was published serially starting in 1909 and into 1910, and it was not a big hit. Leroux had success with other stories. He was primarily a mystery writer, kind of the French version of Arthur Conan Doyle. And it wasn't really until the Lon Chaney movie was made that the story became, kind of this universally beloved classic. Lon Chaney was nicknamed the Man of a Thousand Faces because of his genius with makeup, and he was coming off of making a version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Speaking of unfortunate-looking French people in love, and they said, "Well, who else do we got? We got the Phantom of the Opera, and we got Cyrano de Bergerac. Which, what do you want?" No, but they did say they wanted to make another horror movie. They were interested in doing that. They wanted Lon Chaney's makeup expertise. So this movie was produced. It was a troubled production. They switched directors midway through after shooting a bunch of it. The second director wanted to try and turn it into a comedy of all things, which clearly did not work. And I want to give some credit. I don't have her name here, but they gave it to an editor, and it was a lady, which was pretty unusual for that. Hell, that's unusual for Hollywood today, let alone in 1925. But she spliced together what was left of both of these directors' work, and the classic we have is there for you to see. It's actually on, I think it's on Amazon Prime, so you can check it out. It might even be in the public domain at this point. The important thing about the Chaney version of the story, other than it really being a hit and popularizing everything, is it is, again, other than Webber's, the only one that really hews close to the actual story. The most important thing, I think, that it retains is that the Phantom is deformed from birth. Every other version of this story, starting with the Claude Rains version of it that was done in the 40s, involves a man who is otherwise normal looking and then disfigured in some sort of an accident, or someone throws acid in his face, things like that. And you can tell a story that way, that is a revenge story, but it fundamentally changes, I think, the character of the Phantom. There is a difference between a person who has had their appearance taken away, and a person who has never known a day of human kindness because of their unfortunate visage. And for me, that is such an important distinction, because it says a lot about who this character is, why he does the things he does, and especially why he is so desperate to try and win the heart of Christine. Getting to the Lloyd Webber musical, it does maintain that element. It gives us relatively little about the Phantom's background, but what it does give us is fairly similar to what is in the original book, in that he was a genius and a polymath, gifted in many different areas, not just music, but architecture. He was a trained assassin. He learned this, in the court of Persia. He built for the Shah a maze of mirrors. All of these things that kind of give us the sense that that the Phantom is, not just a threat, but an exceptional threat because of his unusual intelligence and talent. And it also, I think, really underscores the tragedy of the Phantom. That the story is keen to note that but for his face, this person could have been one of the most influential people in history. He could have done so much to help people. He could have done so much to make the world a better place, but he was not given that opportunity. But we shouldn't feel too sorry for him. I think the story is about what we would now call an incel, an involuntary celibate person who is extremely angry and irrational. There is a lot of advertising around the Webber show. I remember when they were doing it at the Venetian in Las Vegas, a lot of the billboards and things would show the Phantom, holding Christine, and it would the words like "be seduced" or "seduction" would be talked about. This is not a seduction. This is a man who lives in the basement and gaslights a poor girl who is decades younger than him. And when he doesn't get his way, he starts murdering people left and right. So, he is, everything about him is, he's also very malevolent. Where I think people get lost is there is humanity in him. And what Webber's version does that none of the other ones do, even the Lon Chaney one, is a key moment at the end. Christine kisses him, and it's not meant to be, I think, a kiss that of mutual love. She doesn't actually love this person. This person is threatening to kill her fiance, as that is happening. No rational person would feel this way about someone who's trying to murder another person. But what it does is it unlocks his humanity. It finally lets him know that the world isn't entirely a terrible place. That there is, he deserves at least some opportunity for kindness. And because he receives that kindness from her, that's when he lets her go. He relents in his evil schemes in both the original story and in the Webber version. I want to take a minute to talk about all of the characters, not just the Phantom, of course, but the relationship, this what we'll call a love triangle, even though, again, I think the fans, Phans, who try to ship Christine and the Phantom, I don't think that's really there. Um, and as proof, take a look at the sequel musical, Love Never Dies, which is premised on the notion that, in fact, they did love each other, and the Phantom later got busy with Christine and fathered a child. It's nonsense, and the show never worked, and this is why. It's because this is a fundamental component that he is not, they are not in love with each other. But anyway, so let's talk about, there's the Phantom, Christine, and Raoul. Christine, especially in the novel, she's young, she's naive, she is reeling from the death of her father, who promised he would, a famous a violinist who told her he would send her an angel of music. And lo and behold, one appears to Christine in the form of a disembodied voice that gives her singing lessons in her dressing room. This only works if you believe that Christine is naive, grief-stricken, and relatively religious. Otherwise, the first time you hear a disembodied voice coming from your dressing room and talking to you, you're either going to think, I'm crazy, or holy fuck, who's watching me? Where is that voice coming from? Any sane person would think that. Instead, Christine goes along with this and is entranced by him, and in the Webber musical is even somewhat hypnotized by him over and over. Again, this does not speak to love. A person who loves another person doesn't manipulate them this way. They don't lie to them. They don't gaslight them. They don't try to get them to do what they want by pretending to be a deity or something like that. So, but that is Christine. But ultimately, she is, I think, the hero of the story. It is Christine who decides at the end of the musical to make herself, she agrees to be bait to catch the Phantom bravely. She is the one who decides to kiss him at the key moment to show that modicum of compassion that saves the day. And then there's Raoul. Now, Raoul is, I think, at least in the Webber version, he's a decent dude. He's just trying, he loves Christine. This is a childhood friend. They are rekindling a romance. And he is decent and reasonable. In the book, he's a little more of a petulant child, which I think muddies the analysis a little bit. I think it works better with him being a stand-up guy who is doing his best while the woman he loves is being pursued by this threatening madman. Turning then to the music itself, which of course is all bangers all the way down. Some credit here, not Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote the music. Charles Hart wrote most of the lyrics. There were a few other lyricists who did original passes, but Charles Hart ultimately did all of the rewrites and things that end up in the final version. It really belongs to him. Also, some credit to Cameron McIntosh on the production, and Marie Bjorgensen did all of the costuming and the set design. So the look of the production is all her. And I think it goes a long way. One of the things I really like about the show, especially the first half of the show, is how kind of inky black things are. It really starts off, letting you know this is a horror story. So we start with the production of, there's a prologue where we see the opera house decades later it's in disrepair, and bits of it are being auctioned off, and this gives way to, fading back to the 1800s when the principal story takes place, and a production of a fictional musical called Hannibal, or opera, I should say. I really like the fictional operas that appear in this. There are 3 of them. There is Hannibal at the beginning. There is Il Muto about halfway through, which is the one where eventually the chandelier falls. And then there is the Phantom's opera, Don Juan Triumphant. I want to camp out on that a little bit because Andrew Lloyd Webber, specifically went out of his way to try and write operatic sounding stuff for the first 2. Especially Il Muto really sounds to me a lot like a Mozart opera. Why don't I put in a little clip of that here so you can get a sense of it.
Poor fool, he makes me laugh. I'm trying to get a better half.
Poor fool, he doesn't know.
Now contrast that with Don Juan Triumphant. Don Juan Triumphant is referenced in the book. We also see it in the Lon Chaney movie. But the Phantom is very private about this opera that he's writing. And in fact, he even says in the book that he just wants it to be buried with him, that, it's just for him. Maybe Christine will sing parts of it for him in his lair, but it's not for the world. In contrast, in the Webber version, it becomes an important plot point because the Phantom demands that Christine star in this opera, and it is his vehicle to try and be with her one more time. It's also another way for him to screw with the theater managers and Carlotta and Piangi, the primary singers in the cast. But one of the cool things about actually getting to hear Don Juan Triumphant is it's a way for the Phantom's psyche to kind of be revealed musically. And one of the really interesting things about it is how discordant it is. It kind of vacillates between these very harsh sounding chords, almost to sound like someone mashing on an organ, to soaring, beautiful parts. And it really speaks to kind of his fractured mind and where it's at, and also his genius. These kinds of dissonant sounds might sound of a piece with, say, Sondheim, but this is even more shattered. Let me give you a little clip of Don Juan Triumphant. Again, we have this balance between harshness, the what sounds like the production of a troubled mind, but also, again, the beauty to which the Phantom aspires. Let's also focus on some of the other outright bangers in the soundtrack. The title track is an interesting one because it was written first, and it kind of shows. It is definitely, it stands out against the rest of the score, which is very operatic and musical. This is a rock opera kind of a song. I think when Webber originally envisioned this as being closer to things that he had already done, like Starlight Express or Jesus Christ Superstar, he thought maybe this would be more like it. In fact, even within the song, there's a discussion of, Christine has a line, "Those who have seen your face draw back in fear." She hasn't seen his face yet. We haven't established that his face is ugly in the story yet. But that's in there because we all know the story. The audience knows it. And again, this almost feels like, if this were a James Bond movie, this would be the thing, 10 minutes in after the first action sequence, we would get this over shots of, golden, dancing girls and footlights and stuff. So it is a little bit of an off piece. More well-known, or perhaps the most beautiful song I think in there that people go to, is "The Music of the Night," the Phantom's song that he sings to try and convince Christine of the beauty and the majesty of his subterranean world. The problem with that is there's two problems with it. One, within the song, he is gaslighting her again and trying to work her over psychologically. He sings things like,
Let your mind start a journey through a strange new world. Leave all thoughts of the world you knew before. Let your soul take you where you long to be. Only then
That is classic abusive behavior. If you're in a relationship and the other person is trying to isolate you away from your friends and family, so you're spending less and less time with them, this should be a giant red flag. As not as big a red flag as perhaps man who dwells in the seventh level of a basement, but still, this is something we should be on the watch out for. And then again, it says this what the Phantom is doing is not love. What the Phantom is doing is trying to control and possess. But also, we know he doesn't really believe all of the stuff he's singing about how beautiful this Twilight world is. Because when we go back to the Phantom's lair at the end of the musical, after she unmasks him and he drags her down there, he sings,
Come once more to the dungeon of my black despair. Down we plunge to the prison of my mind. Down that path into darkness, deep as hell.
That's how he really feels about this place. It isn't a magical Twilight realm. It is, it is hell to him. He uses that word to describe it. Down that path into darkness deep as hell. Why, you ask, was I bound and chained to this cold and dismal place? Not for any mortal sin, but the wickedness of my abhorrent face. That's what he thinks it is. This is a place where he hides from the world because he is so ugly, he thinks he can't function up on the surface. That is, again, a key element as to why having the Phantom be deformed from birth is better than having him be a person who is disfigured and then goes hiding in the opera house. It's implied in the book that the Phantom used all of his architectural knowledge to help with the construction of the opera house. He built this prison for himself. He built a fortress of solitude where he could hide his face away from the world. And now, of course, he regrets having done that. He does occasionally come to the surface, but not much. He appears in a graveyard, both in the book and in the musical, and tries to communicate with Christine there. But by and large, he does remain in his cellar, even though we know from his backstory that we get from a character called the Turk in the book, and that character is replaced by Madame Giry in the musical, that he did at one point go all over the world, off to the Middle East. He learned all of these various crafts that he is now using. And this retreat of his is not explained. What is it that finally made him decide, I've had enough, I'm going to go I'm going to make this basement for myself to live in? We're not told that. But I think it makes more sense as the product of a lifetime of being shunned and denied any kind of kindness or affection, versus a person who got burned literally and then just went to go look for a place to hang out and happened upon this subterranean layer that was, I guess, built for no apparent reason by somebody. It doesn't work, and in fact, one of the some proof that it doesn't work is the 2004 movie adaptation of the Webber musical by Joel Schumacher. In that version, they do change the Phantom's backstory that he is a child, or at least maybe a preteen, who is discovered by Madame Giry in a carnival. She helps him escape and helps him escape into the opera house, meaning he grew up in the opera house. He spent his entire life hiding beneath it. So then when did he learn all of the ninja lasso stuff and the booby trap making? It doesn't make any sense. The story is written a certain way and it makes sense as it was put together. Don't go watch the Joel Schumacher version, by the way. If you want to see this, there is a production of the 25th anniversary at the Royal Albert Hall that you can get. And it's not as good as seeing it live, of course, but it's the next best thing. It's a pretty well filmed version of the stage show, and the leads are terrific in it. They're excellent performances throughout, as you would expect. So that is kind of the primary way to digest it. Anyway, getting back to the Phantom. The look of the Phantom, I think, is really cool too. The original version of the story is fairly close to what Lon Chaney did. He's described as looking like a skull. He has no nose. His skin is very thin and yellow. His eyes are yellow and very sunken back. He basically looks like a walking skeleton, which is creepy. I wouldn't want to look that way. I actually kind of prefer the Weber version. Again, not the Gerard Butler one, because he's barely disfigured and it ruins the story, because if he doesn't look that bad, why is he doing all of this stuff? But the stage makeup is really striking, and it's cool that it is on one side of his face. If you look at the soundtrack or any of the art, you'll notice that it's a picture of a full mask, whereas in the show, he only wears the iconic mask on the right half of his face. That's because the logo was designed first. And during the course of production, they realized a full mask was a problem because, one, it kind of interfered with the sound, their ability to pick up Michael Crawford's actual talking and singing. But more than that, it also, because he had a mask over his whole face, you couldn't get his emotions. You couldn't emote at all. So they went with the half mask, so at least you could see half of his face and his, kind of his mouth and chin anytime he was on stage. I also think that does a lot for his character. He has a certain vanity to him that, he's obviously very conscious of his appearance. And I think there's something about the psychology of a person who is disfigured on one half of his face, trying to imagine, if only the right side of my face looked like the left side, I would have a normal life. Think about characters like Two-Face in Batman, where they do this, having a disfigured side of the face. And really, this goes on and on and on to so many villains throughout pop culture. If you show me a villain wearing a mask, the immediate assumption is, oh, underneath that is something pretty gnarly. Think about Darth Vader. It's the same thing. What does he look like under there? Even cartoon stuff like Cobra Commander. It's all about, oh man, it must be something pretty wild underneath that mask. And the makeup on the stage Phantom is pretty intense. And it has to be, because it has to read from the back row. You have to look at him and go, oh, yeah, I can see that face is really twisted and strange. And they go through, however many hours of makeup it takes to put the actor in that every night. But it has to work. It is the linchpin of the entire story. If the disfigurement doesn't look right, if the deformity isn't, extreme enough and realistic enough, it doesn't, you can't justify the Phantom's actions. Everything he does is because of his face. And I think one of the most powerful things in the story is the way Webber weaves this version of it is the Phantom at first, you don't know, is this a supernatural thing or not? He is seen doing things that don't seem to have an explanation. The way he, almost, steps through the mirror into Christine's dressing room. We eventually, suss out, yes, it's stage magic. But to her, it's real. The way in which Carlotta loses her voice, it's a shame in the movie we see the Phantom spiking some kind of throat stuff she sprays, and that's why she starts croaking. In the stage show, it just starts happening. And you don't really, we have to assume the Phantom did something, but we don't know why. And it's over the course of the show that we kind of, his mystique and his seeming supernatural abilities are stripped away. And we see, he really isn't a supernatural person at all. He's just a very sad man, exercising what talent he has. There, at the end of the Lon Chaney version, he is chased by a mob into the street, and they have him cornered, and he reaches into his coat, and he pulls out his fist, and everybody goes, they take a step back because they don't know what he's got in his hand. He's going to do something to them. And he opens his hand and reveals there is nothing there. It was all an illusion, at which point the mob, grabs him and tosses him into the Seine to die, I guess. It's not the ending in the book or the musical, but I do like that idea that, all of the things he is doing, at the end of the day, it's just all smoke and mirrors. He is just a very sad, a beat down man who is trying to do what we all, I think, want. We all want love. We all want connection. He's been denied that his entire life. He says, this face, this curse that earned a mother's fear and loathing, a mask, my first unfeeling scrap of clothing. That's the only detail he reveals about his life. But man, is that a powerful detail, right? He has never known one moment of kindness from anybody because of the way he looks. I think the story's been remade and remade so many times. There's possibly room for another adaptation of it. But I think it's lost a little of that because our modern relationship to people who have suffered in disfiguring injuries or have deformities, I like to think that has changed over time. I think if you walk into a Starbucks and there's a person there who has some kind of unusual face or a disfigurement, I think the reaction is one of empathy. It's one of understanding. It's not to recoil. There was stories about when Lon Chaney was unmasked in the silent movie, people in the 1920s gasping and fainting in the theaters out of fright. I don't think we have that relationship to a person who looks like that anymore. And that it tells me that a person who is disfigured or deformed in that way, while it is unfortunate and obviously no one would want to have that happen to them, and yes, there are advances in plastic surgery that might mitigate some of that. I don't think a person would be subjected to the kind of torment that the Phantom was, and would not take refuge in a basement, and would not use his disfigurement as a reason to hurt others or to try to kidnap people or drop a chandelier on their heads. That's just not the world we live in, and that's good. I think the Phantom of the Opera posits, there is a kinder world where this would not happen, and hopefully we live in that world now. But I do think the reason people keep coming back to this particular story, this version of it, this is one of the most successful entertainment ventures of all time. The Phantom of the Opera has made more than $6 billion with a B. That's incredible compared to things like Avatar. And I recognize that it's built up that much over, decades. And I don't know how much of that factors in things like the soundtrack sales of that or the profits from the Schumacher movie or how that works. But still, $6 billion for any entertainment venture is something you can't shake a stick at it. And the question, of course, as we ask on this podcast, is why? Why would people go to this length to see this show? And why do people love it so much? Or why are people so in awe of it? Why did it win so many Tonys? I think it's because not only is the music beautiful, the leitmotifs, the way the music is structured, the story just resonates. I think all of us know what it feels like to be unloved. But I also think a lot of us unfortunately know what it feels like to have unwanted attention foisted upon us. And this story kind of lies at the intersection of both. The Phantom, in his mind, believes he is in love with Christine. And he isn't really in love with her until he lets her go at the end. That's the act of a person who does understand, has empathy for the other person's wants and needs. He finally sees her and realizes, I can't murder her fiance. I can't, if I truly love her, I can't possess her. I can't force her into an ultimatum where she has to marry me or we all die. As it is in the book. He's wired the entire opera house to explode, and she has to choose basically him or we all die. In the musical, it's choose me or Raoul dies. But still, those are not the acts of someone who loves another person. It's letting her go. And Christine, for her part, I don't think she really ever loves the Phantom, but she does turn from someone who loathes and fears him to someone who finally sees the person behind the mask. As she says, this loathsome, this haunted face holds no horror for me now. It's in your soul that the true distortion lies. She understands, it's not about what you look like. It's what you do. It's your actions. And that really cuts to the bone for him because, it's convenient for him to blame the way everything in his life, right? It's because of his face. And it's a narcissistic way to go through life. I'm the main character and everyone's mean to me and it's totally unfair. Well, it is unfair that he looks the way he looks. And it is unfair that he lives in a time where people will not be kind and empathetic to him. But it doesn't justify murdering people. It doesn't justify, trying to warp this girl's mind and kidnap her. And he finally sees that. And that's why I think the two have they reach this mutual understanding that's not love, but it is connection. And that, I think, is what makes the story really work, in addition to all of the other spooky things, the Halloweenish things that go with it. But I thank you for coming with me on this journey, and I hope you enjoyed this episode about the Phantom of the Opera. So before we wrap things up, a couple of things. Of course, if you like this podcast, please click, like, rate, subscribe. You know what to do when you hear a podcast that you like. But please drop reviews on Apple or Spotify, wherever you get this podcast, because those reviews help increase the podcast profile, especially here in these early episodes. Again, we are right in the middle of Halloween time, so it's a good chance to get this thing going. Also, if you're nostalgic for the Phantom, if you have things to say about it, about this episode, about our last one on Beetlejuice, or about our next episode, which is going to be about Thriller, not the entire album, but specifically the Thriller song and its famous music video. If you have things to say about that, please tweet at us at NostalgiumPod. That's where you can find us on the internet. So if you have feedback, I'd love to hear from it. If you got reviews, I'll read them. If you got feedback, we'll read it. And we'll talk about your thoughts on these things on the air. So that's it. I hope you really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time for the next entry in the Nostalgium Arcanum.